Hi, Matt McCune with McCune Legal. Let's talk about Chapter 13 bankruptcy. Again, before I get into this, please understand this is basic advice about a Chapter 13 bankruptcy. It is not meant to be complete legal advice for your unique situation. If you have questions about how Chapter 13 might impact your situation, please contact me. There is no charge for a phone consultation. Before we get into Chapter 13, if you haven't first watched the Chapter 7 video, I recommend you go do that. McCunelegal.com under blog, there's a video about Chapter 7. A lot of information that I covered in Chapter 7, particularly related to exemptions and protected property. A lot of that same information is also applicable to Chapter 13, but I'm not going to cover that information again in this video. Look, Chapter 13 is complicated. It's a much more complicated form of bankruptcy than even Chapter 7 is, which is already complicated enough. So you want to make sure that if you're going to get into Chapter 13, you have a very high-level bankruptcy attorney who completely understands all the intricacies to this. All right, so let's get a little bit more into Chapter 13. The Bankruptcy Code calls Chapter 13 an adjustment of debts of an individual with regular income. Basically, Chapter 13 is a reorganization of your debts, but it's designed for people, for an individual or a couple. Most of us, when we hear about bankruptcy, you hear about it on the news. XYZ airline went bankrupt. That's typically going to be a Chapter 11. A Chapter 11 allows a corporation to reorganize, to bring some of their creditors to the bargaining table and negotiate a better deal. View Chapter 13 as that same sort of thing, except for individuals, families. You can't be a corporation, file Chapter 13, and you have to have regular income, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. At its core, Chapter 13 is a repayment plan. You have to make monthly payments to the Chapter 13 trustee. Those payments can go anywhere between 3 to 5 years, depending on your circumstance. Those payments, I can't tell you what they're going to be. Everyone's situation is unique. Until we really dive into your case, until we get at your income, your expenses, your particular debts, there's no possible way to say what your planned payments will be. Some people pay $100 a month. Some people pay thousands of dollars a month. It just depends on the unique circumstances of your case. What you do need to understand is that you don't get your discharge in Chapter 13. And remember, discharge is the reason you're filing a bankruptcy for the most part. You don't get that discharge in Chapter 13 until you complete the plan. You got to pay to play. If you don't make all your payments through Chapter 13, the trustee is going to move to dismiss your case. You're going to get the boot, and you're really back where you started, and you've wasted a lot of time and resources along the way. So never, ever, ever get into Chapter 13 unless you're fully committing to paying the thing off and making the plan work. You know, the biggest difference between Chapter 13 and Chapter 7, and there are a lot of them, but without question the biggest difference is the length of time to discharge. So Chapter 7, it comes very quickly. Check out my prior video if you have any questions about that. Chapter 13, it does take a long time. And you really are in no man's land from the point that you file the bankruptcy to the point that you get a discharge. You know, you're dealing with your debt through this process, and until you discharge and close it out, there's not a lot that you can do as far as moving forward. Buying a new house, you can buy a car in the middle of a Chapter 13. It's very complicated. You're going to pay a ton of interest, so we try to avoid that if possible. But from the point you file to the point you finish, it's a tough spot to be in. But the great thing is you have a light at the end of the tunnel. There is a guarantee that if you do these things, you're going to wipe out a lot of debt. Compare that with debt consolidation, repayment plans, those sort of things. That's really a wing and a prayer. You just don't know what's going to happen. Chapter 13 gives you that finality. It gives you that certainty, that light at the end of the tunnel, that if I follow this path and honor the plan, when I get to the end, good things are going to happen. All right, so if Chapter 13 is really complicated and a lot harder, the question is, why do it? Well, you may not have any other options. If you have a Chapter 7 that was discharged in the last 8 years, Chapter 13 becomes your only option. Okay, so there are circumstances where you're just not going to be able to file a Chapter 7. Maybe it's a prior filing. Maybe your income's above a certain threshold and you're not going to be eligible based on that. There are lots of reasons why you might be forced into filing a Chapter 13 because it's the only option available to you. Now, there's also other reasons that you might file just because it makes good sense. We can do a lot of great things for you in a Chapter 13. We can save your house from foreclosure. You're behind on your mortgage. Foreclosure sale's coming. File Chapter 13. Cure all those arrears. Put them into the plan. Gives you several years to pay back those arrears. Wipe out all the other debts. Suddenly you can afford to save your house. Without a question, the best reason to file Chapter 13 is it might just save your house. You can stop a car from being foreclosed. You can sometimes, in certain instances, cut a better deal with your car lender on a car. We call that a cram down. It's a beautiful thing. You only pay the value of the car as opposed to what you owe. And oh, by the way, I can lower your interest, do a lot of cool things. There's a lot I can do for your benefit in Chapter 13 that I just can't do in Chapter 7 because we have this reorganization. We have this plan where we can modify the rights of certain creditors to your benefit through the plan. You know, garnishment, lawsuits, harassment, all these are good reasons to file a Chapter 13, especially if you're looking at that being your only option. You can't do a Chapter 7. A lot of people want to compare it to debt consolidation. Look, debt consolidation, like I said, it's a wing and a prayer. You don't really know what's going to happen. Chapter 13 gives you finality. The most common misunderstanding about Chapter 13 is that you have to pay back all your debts in full. Look, that's just not true. Frankly, it hardly ever happens. We do sometimes file what we call 100% plans in Chapter 13 where the debtor pays back not all the debt they owe, they pay back 100% of the timely allowed claims. Not all creditors always file claims, but that is the exception to the rule. For the most part, you're paying pennies on the dollar to your creditor through a Chapter 13 without any negative tax consequences. Compare that to debt consolidation, where you're lucky if you can get it down to 60-70%. You got to tack on a ton of fees to the debt consolidation company. And oh, by the way, the IRS might just tax you on that forgiveness of debt. Chapter 13 is an awesome option for certain people in certain instances. If you have any questions about it, I'd love to explain what it might be able to do for you. Before we move on, I want to touch on a few other reasons why Chapter 13 makes a lot of sense. Some people, they have too many assets that are considered non-exempt, unprotected. If you file Chapter 7, you risk losing those assets to the Chapter 7 trustee where they're going to liquidate them to pay your creditor something. You can protect those assets in Chapter 13. You got the boat that the kids love, absolutely don't want to lose the boat. I can help you protect that asset in Chapter 13 where it's highly unlikely you're going to get to keep it in Chapter 7. Other really good reason for Chapter 13 can be taxes. If you owe money to the man, the IRS, the state's coming down on you, those taxes would likely survive a Chapter 7 bankruptcy if they're what are called priority taxes. In Chapter 13, you got to pay them back, but you stop the interest, you stop the penalties, you stop all the junk that the government's throwing at you. You cut a much better deal than you can outside of bankruptcy with the tax authorities, and you get to pay them back over time. Chapter 13 can do a lot for people. Okay, let's talk about eligibility for Chapter 13 bankruptcy. Again, like I said, you must be an individual or a couple. You can't be a corporation. Your business cannot file Chapter 13 or reorganize under that chapter. You also have to have regular income, which is a pretty loose term. You know, Social Security, pensions, obviously a job, benefits of the VA, you know, alimony support, all these things would qualify as regular income for Chapter 13 eligibility. There are debt limitations to Chapter 13. If your debt exceeds certain levels, you can't file a Chapter 13. It's about 1.2 million secured, just under 400,000 in unsecured debt. It does happen sometimes where people have so much debt that they're not eligible for Chapter 13 when they otherwise would like to file it. If you filed a Chapter 7 in the last 4 years and got a discharge, you can't do a Chapter 13 until that 4 years has expired. And then if you filed a Chapter 13 in the last 2 years and got a discharge, you can't file Chapter 13 again. That's very unusual. The plan lasts 3 to 5 years. It's unlikely you're going to get a discharge 2 years from the point you file and then refile again after that point. So look, Chapter 13 is a little bit of a friendlier place to be than Chapter 7 bankruptcy for a variety of reasons, and I'd love to explain those to you in person. All right, let's talk about conversion. Like I said, Chapter 13 is a long time. 3 to 5 years is a long time. A lot can happen in 3 to 5 years. Let's say you got put into Chapter 13 because your income was above a certain threshold. Maybe you lose your job. Bad things happen sometimes. If you're eligible, you can convert your case from Chapter 13 to Chapter 7. There is some flexibility to these things. As your life changes, often your bankruptcy can change as well. Conversion can be very tricky. You need to make sure you have an excellent bankruptcy attorney that can handle conversion right. Sometimes you file Chapter 7, things don't go so well. You can actually convert to Chapter 13. You file Chapter 7, things start to unravel, it starts to get a little bit scary. Often we can convert to Chapter 13, that friendlier avenue, buy you some time over the 3 to 5 years to make some payments that you'd have to come up with instantly in Chapter 7. The conversion, like I said, super tricky, super complicated. Make sure you got a damn good bankruptcy attorney if you're looking to convert a case. Let's talk a little bit about the process of a Chapter 13. A lot of it's the same as a Chapter 7 as far as getting the case filed. Again, go back and watch that video if you haven't done that already. The early steps are very similar. You go through our process to help get your case filed. You get your case filed. You have a creditor meeting a month after you file your case, just like in Chapter 7. However, you also have a payment due to the Chapter 13 trustee a month after you file that case. After the creditor meeting is where things kind of start to diverge from Chapter 7 a little bit. There's what's called a confirmation process to Chapter 13. I keep talking about this plan, right? Chapter 13 is a plan of reorganization of your financial life. There's a process that we go through to get that plan confirmed by the court, which really just means approved by the bankruptcy judge. There are entities that we can fight with along that way. Your secured creditors, your unsecured creditors, most often the Chapter 13 trustee. This confirmation process from the point you file can take up to 6 months or even more in a really complicated, messed up case that turns into a fight. That's unusual. Typically, it's about 2 to 5 months after your case is filed that we get your plan confirmed. Your lawyer's job is to get your plan confirmed to the best terms possible for you, the debtor. Now understand there are competing interests out there. The trustee's job is to get the plan confirmed to the best term possible for your creditors. Secured creditors are also going to be looking out for their interests. So you understand there's a lot of players to this game. There's a lot of back and forth negotiation. There's a lot of lawyering that goes on. You need to make sure that you have a really good attorney because Chapter 13 process is complicated. And what you don't want is some lawyer that's just going to roll over and say, well, the trustee said this, that is what it is. That's not the way the game is played. And I assure you, it's a pretty tough environment right now. You need to have someone willing to go to the mat for you to make sure that you get this confirmed to the best terms possible for you. And what I'm really talking about here, I'm talking about money. We're talking about how much you have to pay on a monthly basis over 3 to 5 years. These are big numbers at stake. Make sure someone's looking out for you. Let's talk about disposable income. This is huge. The vast majority of the time I spend fighting with the trustee for the benefit of my clients in Chapter 13 is about disposable income. Bankruptcy code wants to interpret your income as a snapshot on 1 month and project it forward going 3 to 5 months. Life just does not work that way. But that's the code that we have to deal with. Disposable income is huge. Basically, we have to figure out where your income lies. We have to subtract allowed necessary living expenses. That delta, whatever's left over, is what we call disposable income. Chapter 13 is a repayment plan of your monthly disposable income for 3 to 5 years. So you get how important this is, and it's huge, and it's incredibly complicated because the bankruptcy code doesn't make sense. We've got what's called the means test. We've got some internal revenue code stuff that comes in. It's all jumbled together. It makes no sense. It's the reality of the code that we have from the 2005 reforms. You need to make sure that if you hire a Chapter 13 counsel, they understand this stuff well. And the dirty little secret is most bankruptcy attorneys don't. A lot of bankruptcy attorneys won't even touch Chapter 13 because it's so complicated. A lot that are doing Chapter 13 shouldn't be doing it because they're not committed to figuring this out to their clients as best they can. I will push back for you. I push back all the time. A lot of lawyers will just roll over when the trustee comes up and says, well, this is what we think you should pay, and they'll say, well, that's what you got to pay. That is not how it works. That's not how it should work, okay? This stuff is so complicated, frankly, it doesn't make any sense, so there's so many gray areas that we can fight over. You gotta make sure that you got someone who's willing to push back over disposable income, because you're the one making the payment, okay? Lawyer's going to get paid regardless. You are the one that has to pay this every month to the Chapter 13 trustee, and having someone that knows how to push back, how to fight for your benefit, it's just huge. I can't stress that enough. If you've been paying attention, you know that the discharge is the big deal in any bankruptcy filing. That's the goal, that's the finish line, that's what you want to get. Chapter 13, it takes that 3 to 5 year process to get you to discharge. The Chapter 13 discharge is actually a little bit broader than the Chapter 7 discharge. It's not as good as it used to be. Prior to 2005, we used to call it the super discharge. Man, it was awesome. You'd be amazed at what you could have done in Chapter 13. Can't do that anymore. You have your friends in Washington to thank for that. Don't forget to vote. But it is what it is. The Chapter 13 discharge still wipes out a lot of debt. We can still do a lot of incredible things. Better deal on your car, save your house, deal with taxes, get your protection from certain creditors, wipe out a bunch of debt. You can do a lot of great things through Chapter 13, but you gotta get the discharge. You gotta finish this thing. You gotta make sure that you have good communication with lawyer. During that 3 to 5 years, you got to make sure your lawyer's going to respond to you, not disappear, get disbarred, do all these things that knucklehead attorneys do sometimes. Careful who you hire. Can't stress that enough. I've seen this over the last 16 years now. A lot of goofballs come and go, they disappear, and if your lawyer disappeared on you and something comes up 3, 4 years later, no one's going to want to help you without having to get paid again, and that's tough when your lawyer disappeared. Get the discharge. Can't stress that enough. All right, so let's say all this works out. You make the right hire, your lawyer goes to bat for you, you get your plan confirmed, you make the payments, it's fair to all parties, awesome. You get your discharge, yay, that took forever. What now? Well, you know, breathe a sigh of relief, but it's going to seem like you've been in this thing forever. Here's the good news about Chapter 13 as it applies to your credit report. A Chapter 13 will come off 7 years after you file, as opposed to 10 years for a Chapter 7. And that's from the point you filed. So let's say you're in a 5-year plan. You file the bankruptcy, you're in this thing for 5 years. As I said before, you're kind of in no man's land for that 5-year period, not able to do much. You get your discharge, suddenly the debt's wiped out. I mean, you're only 2 years away now from your bankruptcy falling off your credit. I mean, suddenly it's that happened. So it takes a long time to finish it, but it falls off your credit from the point it's done much, much quicker than a Chapter 7 does. Thank you for your time. My gosh, if you've watched both videos now, you and I have spent quite a bit of time together, so really appreciate that. I salute you for taking some quality time and really educating yourself. You know, when you're in financial distress, when you're in trouble, obviously if you're exploring bankruptcy, you know, money's tight, and so what a lot of people do is they just look for the cheapest option. And that may or may not work out for you. It does work out for some people, but more likely than not, when you go for the cheapest option, you know, I wish you luck. Now, there are really good bankruptcy attorneys that charge reasonable fees. Frankly, we have to, because our clients are in financial distress. I don't know any bankruptcy lawyer that's doing this to get rich. For the most part, you know, the really good bankruptcy attorneys, they're good people that want to make an honest living and help good people move forward with their lives. Chapter 13 is way more complicated than the average bankruptcy, so I would tell you, you got to be even more careful who you hire when you're looking to hire a Chapter 13 lawyer. Hey, look, I'll talk to you for free. There's no charge. I'll spend 15, 20 minutes on the phone with you, going over your situation, give you my 2 cents, what I think you should do, give you some advice there. Take that advice, do with it what you want. Again, no charge for that. But I would love to have the opportunity to explore how to help you and your family move forward from this bump in the road so you can get back to your life and what really matters. Because, you know, at the end of the day, you know, filing bankruptcy sucks. It is what it is for folks. So pick wisely, move forward, and get back to your life. Thanks so much. Have a great day.